My name is Jessie Makinson. I'm from Camberwell in London and I'm an artist, mainly painting. I went to Camberwell Art College for foundation, which was just up the road, and I loved that. It was, you just met so many people from all over the world. And then I ended up in Edinburgh, at Edinburgh Art School, which I think I didn't take very seriously, but it was kind of like a hard time to do figurative painting. You kind of got told a bit not to do it at art school. I suppose it was like the hangover from the YBAs, really. And so figurative painting was just kind of, it felt like it was embarrassing. And there didn't really feel like any way to get your work seen unless you put on shows yourself or stuff. And so then after ECA, I couldn't really get into any of the art schools. So I ended up at the Royal Drawing School in London. And they were hugely supportive of me, kind of personally and in the school. And it's quite an interesting place. It's not like, you know, the Viennese, that kind of European schools where you learn to draw, you learn through doing. And you do observation drawing every day. And so you can end up sat down drawing something you wouldn't necessarily want to draw, but you would learn to see things that belonged in your world of your artwork, like in a street scene or something. Like that's my idea of hell during a street scene. But it helped me kind of be selective, and that's also free, so that was great. And you got a free studio. And then I still couldn't get into an MA, so I went to Terps Banana, this really great painting magazine set up by Marcus Harvey. And at some point, maybe 10 years ago, 12 years ago, he set up an art school in Elephant and Castle on a council estate. And it's supposed to be an alternative to the institutions. So the students don't have to write anything and the tutors don't have to write anything, and it's just all about painting. And we talk a lot about the ups and downs of things and how you might have to make bad work to make good work. And it's not like a finishing school or anything like that. And so, yeah. And I didn't start really showing my work till I was about 30, about 10 years ago, after I'd been to the drawing school in Terps. So I was quite lost for a while and didn't know that many artists who were painting figurative painting at the time. And I suppose that coincided with like Instagram and being able to meet people all over the world. I really liked going to the National Gallery with this great artist, Anne Bowker, and she just had a lot of energy. She would maybe pick 5 paintings that she wanted you to draw from each day. There were other classes where you drew the same painting for a year, but she was like, no, you know, so she had us like running around. And being forced to do it is great. It's quite hard to go into the National Gallery on your own and sit down and do it, but you learn so much from, well, just looking and drawing. It's like taking notes. You don't really understand an image till you sit down and draw it. And it probably has massively informed my painting. And I still, to this day, look at historical prints and drawings and paintings. I suppose at the National Gallery, I would like things that weren't like my paintings. I mean, I love Sasetta and the early Renaissance paintings in the National Gallery, but I wouldn't like to draw from them because my language is too similar, so I don't discover things. So I prefer to draw from like a later Titian or something. And I mean, I did like do the Poussins as well, and they are neater, but they're just so complex that they're always interesting to draw. And it's not too busy, the National Gallery, either. You can actually do it, like manage to sit down. And that was an invaluable experience to draw at the National Gallery, for sure. I've always had my own style that comes across whatever I've made. It's, you know, if I see someone's work I like and I'm excited about it, even if I try and copy it, I just can't do it. Like, it just comes out looking like my painting, no matter how hard I try. So I think that's always been there. And earlier on, I would paint the kind of tiny little figures in non-scenic spaces, and the spaces would collapse and change, and perhaps they looked a bit more kind of graphic in style. And that's why I was influenced by miniatures and spending a lot of time in Turkey, in Istanbul. And I think that before I went to the drawing school, I'd been trying to scale up my figures because they were all so tiny and they were linear. I'd work on a lot of brown paper with black ink, and they were more cartoony. There's not really any images of those around, I don't think. I used to like throw everything away and not take photos, so now I don't have anything. And so the drawing school helped me develop my practice and gave me time. I was almost like, I almost had so much stored up, ready to go by the time I got there. And Terps also helped me do that. I was making like one huge painting like this size a week, and the energy at Terps was really high and really productive. This year I changed my work because I had previously, maybe the last 5 years or whatever, I've been getting very interested in folklore and fantasy, sci-fi, that sort of thing. But last year I kind of looked around. I'd followed my interest down a path so far and my research so far that I looked up and I didn't really recognize where I was anymore. And I felt like some of the fantasy elements and the sci-fi things and like the anthropomorphic figures were obscuring things that I was interested in painting. And actually now I've kind of got rid of what I'm referring to as the fairy party. It's kind of, I feel like even though the subject matter is less weird, the paintings have become weirder because there's a different tension with the figures that's more noticeable. Like, things aren't disguised by all the noise and the costume. Well, they didn't really have costumes, but I was always trying to get them dressed and I couldn't work it out. But now I've managed to get everyone dressed, basically. Yeah, and I'm interested in clothing and the pleats of the tennis players and the patterns on clothes and things like that. And passages, like in this painting, where the patterns flow up into each other. And that was definitely getting lost in the mix with the older paintings. And people would say, oh, you know, you're painting fairy parties. And I'd be like, what? That's nothing to do with me. So I wanted to change things a bit. I used to start with a abstract painting underneath, which I don't do anymore. So maybe about 3 years ago, I might have stopped that. I would mix pure pigment with a dispersant and make these very big gestural marks all over the painting, and it acted like a compositional tool on the surface of the painting. It would help me place things in front of each other and spread things out. And, you know, in a way, if you're trying to draw a picture, but the automatic thing is to spread everything out so you can see everything. So that would help me place things behind each other. But then there was this huge sort of fight between covering up and revealing. And I think it actually started in Terps, where I had got it into my head that my paintings weren't messy enough. And so it was a way around it. I would make them messy underneath and then cover it up. And it's just like a cheat, but it actually turned out to be a really useful tool until it actually became a problem or a distraction that was getting in the way of me moving my work on. So I dropped it. And I think I'd learned what I needed to learn from doing that. When I started the process of the abstract underpainting, I would look at it and find a composition. And then that developed into working with drawings and hooking those drawings onto this abstract structure. So it's not a massive jump really, it's just I don't have that kind of mess underneath. So with this show, for example, I had it in my head that I wanted to paint these 1970s architects, and I researched a lot of old photos of architects and things like that, and drawings and images, and I collected a lot of them together, and then I'll draw super quick sketches just to get the kind of information from the photos that I want, and then I'll kind of blend them all together or make something up entirely, and I'll make a very neat linear drawing of the figures, but it won't have their faces in or their hands or the clothes maybe. So lots of it is decided once I start painting. So I'll draw this drawing and then I'll draw it on the canvas, and then I'll work one section to another. So I'm not like a painter where I go all over and build up. I will completely finish a tiny section and then grow it out. And I have to see some sense of what it would look like finished in order to carry on. And they're so time consuming that I don't know how I wouldn't be able to build up and just see if it would work, you know. So I do pose my own hands for the paintings, which I suppose came initially out of a kind of ease. If I'm in my studio and I need a hand, it's much easier to take a photo of my own hands. They're very important. I can't stand lazy hands in a painting. It doesn't matter if the hand is like 2 marks, but it's got to be thought about, I think. They're so important. Like I don't like if it's just some blob or something. So the hands and the faces, I source reference images, and that can be from film, TV, the internet, friends. They tend to be the thing from observation in the paintings, and then most of the stuff is made up to some extent. I can see now that I would have a thread of portraits within my practice. I feel a lot freer since I changed my work, that I can apply my language to anything, and that I could almost do like a series of card players, a series of tennis players, and that different paintings can have more space or less space, or the tennis players play with a kind of graphic flipped up floor, which does come again from the miniatures and the early Renaissance paintings, that kind of flat tipped up space. And I just feel like quite free and positive about like next steps. Now I'm not painting these kind of mythological scenes, basically. I think I've carried certain people through my life with me. So at a young age, I was interested in Paula Rego, and at different points in my life, I've liked different parts of her work. I was very influenced by her kind of, the drawing she did on the floor with the black lines and the animals and stuff like that. So that was very influential to me early on. I just always have looked back at Paula Rego, but also Stanley Spencer and his multi-figure scenes, and Edward Burrough, and the kind of British surrealists. And I suppose I didn't really think about the early Renaissance until I came to the drawing school, because I made this really odd long painting with these tiny figures that came about very naturally, and it looked like Lorenzetti's Good Bad Government fresco in Siena. And also there's this other painting, I can't remember who it's by, but it's of these monks in the wilderness. I can't remember what that's called, but the paintings were looking like that. So that's when I started to look at the early Renaissance painting. It came from me, and then I started looking at the paintings rather than the other way around. And I have said in the past that I was looking at Flemish artist, but it was mainly kind of etchings and drawings. So it would be etchings and drawings of street scenes, and I would use those for figure relationships. People fighting, or people in brothels or in inns, or street scenes. So I was always looking for crowds without having to pose a crowd or use a contemporary image. I like to use those historical images and take something from them but completely forget them at the same time. I like to use historical images of crowds rather than photographs, because a drawing is, it's a thought space. Some work's been done for you, everyone's placed so you can see them. Whereas a photograph, you might just be seeing people's heads or something. So it's, and it's like a specific angle. And I'm interested in kind of misunderstanding these old images as well. I think that I'm scared to just be like, I need a picture of a crowd, type it in the internet, and then the first thing that come up I use. I think that it's more interesting to look in the archives, like the V&A and the British Museum and stuff like that. Lots of people have been saying that these paintings have this German kind of Weimar feel, and I think it maybe is this pub scene in particular, but I think it's also the highly tense and stylized figures and their faces and their expressions, and they now seem to have more of their own world, whereas the older paintings seem to be a bit more of a kind of gang or a group, whereas now they seem like individuals. And I have always liked that German art. Colour is quite important to me, and I don't think that I think I paint often quite uncomfortable colours, and I often wish I could paint something much more subtle, much less high contrast, and I try quite hard to, but I'm completely unable to. I feel like I oversee colour. When I used to do life drawing, I used to like to use 3 kind of random colour pastels and just make it work. And I think I do manage to make quite uncomfortable colours work. But I tried hard this year to calm my colours down, and I've changed the way I make the paintings and the surfaces. So I used to have a white primer, and now I work on a clear primed linen. And this means the colours don't sit up as much, and they're not as glaring. I think it's helped to unify the colours a little bit, and I've wanted the paintings to be darker, and I've stopped using a pure white, and so all the whites in the paintings are a pink or a purple actually, but they read as white, even in the tennis paintings. And I was looking at Graham Little's book and how he uses white, and there's not an actual single bit of pure white in any of his paintings, and I was quite influenced by him when I started the architect's painting, but they're completely different paintings really. So so I've been trying to calm the colour down, and because they were a lot brighter before, but they're still kind of raucous. For this show, I have changed the way I've titled my paintings. They're much more descriptive. So one of them is called The Architects, one of them is called The Players, and it's something that I would never have done before. I didn't like the idea that you would describe a painting, and I think something that has happened recently with changing my work away from this mythological and fantasy stuff is that they are not necessarily much more direct, but they're less evasive. They're not hiding so much in the noise, and I think that's reflected with the titles. And I used to like to collect titles from things like books or things that I read or conversations I overheard. With this show, I feel like one of the references I have that comes and goes is The Governesses by Anne Sayre. which tells the story of three governesses in Paris at maybe the turn of the last century, and they act as a kind of unit or a gang, and they basically are quite disruptive. And I feel like I have that with the picnic and the tennis a little bit. But the tennis is, I was trying to do a series of tennis cross Balthus, and I was doing a tennis Manet painting, and I was trying to like mix up historical paintings with the tennis a little bit, and to have a sense of like the absurd and kind of excess with all the balls, and everybody in all the paintings are kind of doing things wrong. They don't look like they're playing tennis right, or they look far too old to be schoolgirls. And so I think there's an interest in the kind of fake or some kind of stage-like atmosphere where the action is always slightly off. It's always kind of post-action or pre-action, some kind of thing like that. I think the figures can be kind of stiff and awkward, but they're also, there's various things I do to try and have a flow in the painting, and that will be adding so before I get a lot of the pattern or the detail in, they look even stiffer. But it's hard. Some people would say they look really super stiff and awkward, and some people think they look quite relaxed in their spaces. But, well, I sometimes think lots of the problems with my paintings are the good things. So the awkwardness and the stiffness, it like adds an atmosphere. And if, you know, sometimes I try to make things more messy or gestural, and it just doesn't help. It makes them look a bit airy, you know, the tension disappears. So I think I kind of need that. I was thinking the other day about how difficult it is to describe the feeling of having a painting in your mind, but not really knowing what it's going to look like at all until you've finished it. And that it's so hard to describe that feeling, and that you have all these other paintings in you that you've not made yet or found the feeling for. And I'm not always thinking about what I want the painting to do. I'm thinking about how can I make the painting. I'm thinking very close up about colour relationships and patterns and things fitting in together. And I work very, very close up to the canvas. And my focus with making a painting is making a painting. I don't know. I'm not thinking about surrealism or feminism. It's not like where I'm coming from. My paintings are feminist, but I don't think it's a big deal. I think they just are, you know. I think anything that I make will reflect the times that I live in and my own interests. And I mean, I think it's quite funny because people think that paintings are much more personal and more about you than any other form. You know, if I paint something, people will often respond to it as if it's completely about me. And in some respects it is, but also it's not. I'm making something up. I think of it more like if you write a book, it doesn't have to be completely about you, but your fingerprints are all over it.